hope is that you can walk away from this presentation having learned a little bit more about our approach to storytelling and emerging technologies, specifically around AR and VR. We're very, very passionate about the opportunities when it comes to telling these types of stories, and especially when it comes to engagement and building a better understanding of some of the content types that we work on. Now, what's really interesting is this journey started about 5 years ago, next month, as a matter of fact. I was working in the video game industry as an art director at EA, and I'd received a call from a company called GANNETT. And truthfully, I had no idea who these folks were. I didn't apply for a job. It turns out someone gave them my phone number. But essentially, they'd asked me a question if I'd be interested in coming in to discuss how virtual reality can be applied to storytelling. That's all I knew. And I'll never forget driving into to their offices, massive glass buildings, and thinking to myself, I will never want to do this. This is way too corporate. But what ended up happening was how inspirational that conversation was, and realizing this is for journalism. That at the time, trying to figure out how we can take interactive storytelling, applying it to stories that actually matter, and seeing what we could go from there. So this is why I'm really interested to have the opportunity to share with you what we've done, where we're going, and why we're doing it. So essentially, for every project that we work on, the conversation around the conference has been, it's all about storytelling. Which is the right story? How do you decide which stories are the ones that you're going to be working on? And there are two words that we always use when we're trying to determine which projects we're going to support: explore and discover. When you think about the opportunities with VR and AR through interactivity, we want to provide a user experience that allows users to kind of gently guide them through this, but at the same time, allow them the freedom to discover the stories that you're trying to tell them. But why AR? So from virtual reality and the successes we've had early on, we understood that interactivity leads to strong, strong engagement. And for us, it's just a natural fit. I mean, USA Today is rich, has a rich history of innovation, so it almost just made sense for us to start exploring how we can use these technologies towards, for our audiences. And at the same time, how do we do it differently? As I had mentioned, we're former video game developers, so we understand the opportunities there, and we understand that it will take some work, but once we lay the foundation, we're there and we can do something that's fairly unique. And lastly, the recognition that we're receiving is pretty amazing. We don't go into any of this, expecting to win awards, but the recognition that we do have lets us know that we're heading down the right path. But as I had mentioned, this had started 5 years ago. So with what you see up here is a little bit of a timeline, starting with our very first VR project, Harvest of Change. And for those of you who are kind of old school VR developers, we started developing this on the DK1 through Unity and trying to figure out how we can incorporate 360 video into this interactive space. Then beyond there, from what we ended up learning, we started working with our branded content studios for a Honda-sponsored 360 video ride in an Indy car. And then we returned to interactive storytelling with USS Eisenhower, and then more recently, The Wall. But from those learnings, we identified, okay, we might start to exploring augmented reality. But through that process, we've been very fortunate, as I had mentioned. Harvest of Change won an Edward R. Murrow Award, which was fantastic for us. And then with The Wall, we were very fortunate to be a part of the Pulitzer-winning the project, The Wall. And being recognized as one of Fast Company's most innovative companies in AR and VR in the number 4 slot was very, very humbling. I mean, great company to be amongst. But let's talk about augmented reality. So our journey in AR started early last year, January 2018 to be specific. And what we ended up realizing is we wanted to find an opportunity to create an experience that users can watch these launches from anywhere around the world through AR. And as we weren't exactly too sure how we were going to do this, but we had to go through a process of learning. And with any project that we're going through, we wanted to provide value to a user, especially if they're going to download the experience and ultimately tune in for all of the launches that are occurring at a Kennedy Space Center. So with the team that we had, it was about 4 of us, we flew down to Kennedy Space Center and did several trips to really kind of understand what might users find most interesting. Going up into the vertical assembly building, going to mission control, getting nice tours of the entire complex to understand Launch Complex 39A, where SpaceX launches their Falcon 9s from and on from there. It's really trying to get an understanding of, what can we do that is unique, but also provides an experience that folks want to tune in more than once. And overall, the development was pretty straightforward. It took us about 3 months to complete. But for us, since we're doing this as a live AR broadcast, we only had 2 actual launches to test this against. I believe it was in February was our first one against a Falcon 9, and it worked fairly well. But our last test was by far the most exciting for us. And those are 2 of the folks on my team standing on our press box. And we're overlooking Launch Complex 39A, in which a ULA rocket was about to launch. And there were quite a few folks from NASA scattered out, and we're looking at our phones on top of this roof, and the rocket took off. And our sequencing in real time, live AR with a virtual rocket, animating in the exact same sequence of the one out in the distance and hearing NASA cheer, and we're geeking out on top of this roof was pretty exciting for us. So what that told us is we were heading down the right path and we have something that is unique. And we weren't expecting too much from this, but what we ended up packaging and putting together is something that we're really, really excited about. And here's a preview. And there should be audio. Yep. Thank you, thank you. So now let's look at some of the numbers. Now keep in mind, this was our first app, first AR experience that we built, and merely it was only supposed to be a prototype. We expected nothing from this. We were very surprised when it launched that Apple featured it within New Apps We Love, prominently. I think it was within the 2nd spot, which scared us immediately because we realized this is a live experience. How is it going to react on the first launch that was supposed to occur 4 days later? But 6 minutes, 56 seconds average time spent during each of the live launches is very, very encouraging for us. And it's been consistent ever since we launched this product back in March of last year. We expect stronger engagement when new rockets start to launch, more Delta Heavies, for example, some of the new Falcon 9s, and especially when you consider the Dragon and some of the new missions coming up. But also, app downloads, 104,000, pretty encouraging for us as well. But what's most exciting is that number at the very end. Over 14,000 unique users tuned in for a 15-minute AR broadcast. We did not expect it, and things were breaking. But let us know that we've got something special, and now it's time to start exploring how we can expand beyond a standalone app to surface the content to our users through USA Today. So what did we do? Ultimately, we realized that we had to reach our audiences through the USA Today app. We had explored different SDKs that could surface AR, but as former game developers, we understood the opportunities through interactivity. We wanted flexibility. We wanted to be able to create robust experiences. So ultimately, we decided that Unity has to be a part of the USA Today app, both on iOS and Android. And I'd like to say it was easy, but it absolutely was not. It took us 4 months to develop. The entire team completely focused on it and working very closely with our mobile team on the product side of things. Ultimately, we ended up getting it, which was fantastic. But the reason we also wanted to do this is we wanted to create a series of templates, scripts that we could reference that would allow us the opportunity to focus on the story rather than how do we create this. And once we had it, we basically used 2018 as a period of laying down the foundation. And with some of the projects that I'll be sharing, you'll kind of get an understanding as far as why we spent all the work from 3.2.1 launch onto Unity integration. But our first story our most popular story that we had built last year, which is a very interesting one for us. I was approached by Robin Amer, who is a executive producer on our podcast investigations team for the city. And we had met at a conference, and she was very interested in exploring how AR might be a good fit to help promote a podcast. Now, ultimately, most folks don't think that's a good fit. I mean, when you consider an audio-first experience, something's very visual and interactive. But for us, it immediately made sense. But we needed to know more of the story. And until we knew exactly what that story was, we could start identifying some of the gaps that we could kind of help fill through interactivity in AR. And here's what she sent us.
I've been reporting in Chicago for more than a decade, and I've reported all kinds of stories about the built environment, about secret tunnels hidden underneath the loop, and about how you replace a train bridge while the train is still running. I've also reported on housing discrimination and predatory lending, so stories about all of the remarkable stuff that gets built in Chicago, but also about how it gets built, and about all of the foul and crooked things that people will do when they think nobody's looking. And so the story of what happened on this lot, the story I want to tell you, stunned me despite everything I already knew about Chicago, about how corrupt and ruthless it can be, about how stark the divisions are between black and white, rich and poor, between the people who hoard power and the people who will fight for their fair share.
Anytime you see anybody drive over in a vacant lot in a limo, you know it's no good.
This story is about a giant illegal dump, 6 stories high.
And that right there is what hooked us. An illegal dump 6 stories high in a community just south of Chicago. There was a term that was coined based on the story, environmental racism. And how can we highlight this through AR? So what we ended up doing was we created an interactive to basically answer the one bit that was missing. What does this place look like? How can we provide a sense of scale, but ultimately show users that this dump was right across the street from a school. Kids could not go out into recess because of asthma concerns. The foundations of the homes just across the street were broken. I mean, mass corruption, essentially a forgotten community. And it worked. It did very well for us. We learned quite a bit through it, but at the same time, trying to tell this very high impact story, we also had to consider the design side of things as well. So we use narration as much as possible to ease a user into the experience and allow them the opportunity to explore and discover some of the stories around the dump. Things such as, I'd mentioned the school and the homes and on from there. But then this year, so rather than trying to create custom 3D assets for all of our experiences, we wanted to go back to something that we had leveraged for the Wall VR project, photogrammetry. And the very first project we ended up working on was a sports project because we had the opportunity to meet with an all-star defenseman from the Washington Caps. So it was a very relevant story, and we were invited out to the practice facility, and we only had 15 minutes to meet with him, interview, and essentially just capture him as much as possible for our first AR experience. And ultimately, it worked out fairly well visually, but to be completely transparent, it wasn't a good user experience. There was no solid user flow. It was far too linear. But we use every opportunity to kind of refine what it is that we're doing and really understanding what works and doesn't work. But we had some decent engagement time, about 1 minute average for a 5-minute experience. I would say that's okay, but for us it was more about learning the process and how can we work closely with editorial but build these relationships with external partners such as the Washington Caps. And we took what we ended up learning to work on a project with our Life team, featuring costumes from Oscar-nominated films. Now this particular project was very interesting. It was very difficult for us as well. And the reason why is we had a very tight timeline to turn this around. And we could not move forward with anything until the actual nominees were announced. So we're trying to create an AR project, 2.5 weeks ahead of the actual event, flying out to LA, capturing all of the costumes, interviewing all of the costume designers about the details, and then pulling all this stuff together is a very, very tall order, but we were able to do it. But that's not also taking into consideration that we wanted to redo our user flow. Because what we identified through the previous project is users want the flexibility to, and in this case, go to a specific costume. Maybe they're interested in others, maybe they're not. No surprise to us, Black Panther was the most popular, but what did surprise us was Mary Poppins. Now, what's really interesting about that particular one is users were actually scrolling through the gallery-like carousel that we incorporated for this experience. Black Panther is the very first one. Mary Poppins is the very last one, which lets us know that users are actually engaging with the content. They're going deep within the experience. So it worked out pretty well for us. So what we ended up noticing was strong engagement time, almost 6 minutes average time spent within the experience per user, which is phenomenal for us. And as I mentioned, it only took us 16 days to produce. You know, having spent all of the previous year focusing on integrating Unity, setting up those scripts, understanding the workflows, and ultimately the process of creating these assets to focus on the story, allows us to quickly produce a piece of content as robust as this, but ultimately with strong engagement. And here's an example of what we built.
The Dora Milaje are mighty warriors steeped in cultural influence. We interviewed Oscar-nominated costume designer Ruth E. Carter to hear her journey through African culture and how she crafted the aesthetic for Black Panther's all-female Wakandan army.
Their armor is inspired by the Ndebele tribe. And the Ndebele tribe are from the Zulu tribe in South Africa.
Freddie Mercury's style is unique, outrageous, and gender-bending. We interviewed Julian Day, costume designer for the film, who shared the challenges recreating Freddie's iconic royal look for that crazy party scene.
One of the challenges in representing Freddie Mercury in this film was to make sure that the fans were happy, because he's got such a huge fan base and they're very loyal, and I think Freddie was very loyal to his fans as well, so I wanted to make sure that they were happy with his look.
You know, we always get asked why AR, why is his story right for AR? And I feel as if the way that we layered on the information, really answers that question pretty well. We featured 6 costumes. Each costume had up to about 5 annotations. But the Black Panther example is great. When Ruth starts talking about the striations within the leather, that's representative of the scarification in a few African tribes. The red leather is based on the clay that they would cover themselves in, and then such as the Ndebele tribe as well. So allowing the user the opportunity to get up close and learn more about some of these finer details, it was a perfect hit for us. But where do we go from there? Our very next project, we wanted to take what we had learned and work with a different team, not necessarily editorial, but a kind of a data research team and a traditional print graphics team to highlight the advancements in technology when it comes to skyscrapers. We ended up featuring 5 different buildings. We rendered out each of these buildings on our own, providing a nice, easy, and intuitive user flow that there is a beginning, middle, and end, but ultimately still leveraging that gallery-like carousel, so if users were more interested in, let's say, the Burj Khalifa, they could see that. The very last card, you could compare all of them against one another and really have an understanding of scale when you compare each of the 5 buildings. And so then our next one is something that we're really, really excited about. The team, while I was away on vacation, I'd always promised myself I'm not going to check email, but I happened to. And they started working on an AR piece to feature Notre Dame and what ended up happening. They ended up building this out and publishing within 8 hours, which is a tall order for anyone. But it was very low lift because we had that foundation in place. We no longer had to worry about the development. We didn't have to worry about the how. We could focus on the story. So I was really proud of the organization for being able to rally together, when it came to the product side for publishing, when it came to the editorial side, and it came to the development side. They all came together, worked together, got this out in a very relevant amount of time. And this isn't the first example that we've done, but the fact that we can actually turn things around in near breaking news cycle is pretty exciting for us. And lastly, thought I'd formally announce our next project that is set to release next Tuesday. We ended up partnering up again with our sports team, but to feature the Women's World Cup team that's heading out to the FIFA tournament just in a couple weeks. So with this particular one here, we've provided 2 different examples. One is meet the team, have an understanding of who the players are, the positions that they play, see them on a virtual field, if they play right front, whether they play midfield, defense, and on from there. And then on the right, what you see is we had the opportunity to meet with Alyssa Naher, who is their lead goalkeeper. And we interviewed her, captured her in photogrammetry, and essentially she speaks to the challenges of her role on the team and trying to block the most difficult shot in the sport, which are penalty kicks. So we used that as an opportunity to create an AR minigame in which you'll see an animated athlete out about 12 meters away, kicking at 3 different speeds up to 80 miles an hour. And it's right then and there you get an understanding of, I don't know how anyone can block something that fast, and some of them are so good that they can actually do it, but we're challenging users to actually step left, stay in the center, or move right for random shots coming towards them at different intervals. And what's really exciting for us is that we also had our first AR sponsorship. Fox Sports is actually sponsoring the Meet the Team segment. So what you see up here are just kind of work in progress. We're starting to finalize and polish the experience, but you'll be able to access this on June 4th in both USA Today apps for iOS and Android. Thank you.